Hey guys, this is Mikro, and I'm gonna be teaching you guys the most fundamental concept that makes every Overwatch player good, and a concept that applies to New World significantly and will help you win wars, OPRs, and really any engagement. And this concept is called ebb and flow. What ebb and flow translates to is push and pull. So the idea is it's like a wave. Like if you have momentum, or if you are the wave, then you go forward, and then if the other team has momentum, then you go backwards. And this going forward or going backwards is dependent upon various factors that are different between games. Usually in New World, that will be if like the most fundamental level is if they are scarier than you at that moment, then you want to back up, and if you are scarier than them at that moment, then you want to push in. And things that make people scarier than other people are situational. Ults make it a lot easier to tell ebb and flow now in New World. So if your see your team may use like a vines and gets 10 people and they're all stuck in a clump and they're all popping cleanse pots or something like that, then you have the ebb and flow because you are the ones putting the pressure on them, and then you could follow up on that ultimate and then just wipe them basically. So that's fundamentally at a basic level what ebb and flow is. I broke it down into three steps that are consistent throughout any game, and this will apply to any game that has some sort of stabilizing factor. So it won't apply to like Valorant and CS:GO because Valorant and CS:GO you don't generally gain life back. Although Valorant there is Sage, but it's like relatively minor compared to like armor and whatnot. Um, but in games where there is a higher TTK or time to kill, ebb and flow is a concept that applies. In games where there are healers, ebb and flow is also a concept that generally applies. So you have there's a heal up phase. This is the pre-fight. Usually it's where people are getting to full HP before they do anything, and then you have like a dive or nuke phase. So if people are on a point and people are living around the point, then usually a shot caller will say everyone nuke the point or everyone dive on point, and then everyone goes on the point and uses all their abilities in hopes that people die. And then after that is usually where you stabilize or you heal back up, and then you declump so that they can't do this dive back to you, because if you're clumped, you're more easily able to be nuked in most circumstances. And then this cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. And like in terms of Overwatch, this is like the concept that has made my team successful. So I founded this team, and all these players are semi-pro now. So, but there's a decent amount of earnings and whatnot, and I've been on other teams since this. But this is probably the most successful team I've been on, or I've created, because I was the one that originally created this and saw the vision with it. So didn't sell it through. So that's where this kind of comes from. That background. So I'm gonna explain it in terms of Overwatch first, because in Overwatch it's very very obvious. So this is a circumstance where, may you rest in peace, Alarm. He hits an anti-nade on this Reinhardt, and when he hits the anti-nade, this Reinhardt can't be healed, right? And so this whole entire yellow team, the Fusion, are like, oh, this beast, this Defiant Reinhardt can't be healed, so I'm gonna push on him and then try to kill their team. So the yellow team has the ebb and flow right now, and the red team's gonna be trying to run away until this anti-nade wears off, and then the yellow team's gonna try to push in and get the kills while this anti-nade is here, which happens a second later. So that would be an example of ebb and flow, and then this other team tries to counteract that because they're all anti-nated with a beat, but then they're too late to that, so they just lose. Let me play it back on a faster speed. So, like in the span of like 1 to 2 seconds in Overwatch, that's like all it takes for ebb and flow. Like anti-nade, this guy gets killed like immediately, and then this yellow team wins the fight. So, but on New World, it's a lot slower. So I'm going to explain it like theoretically using a common war tactic first, and then I'll do it in OPR for the people, because I think the OPR one's a little bit more complicated than it is in war usually. So in a war situation, you usually have a main ball and then you have like a off point, and there's one free point. There's not always one free point, but for the sake of this, we'll say that this we don't really care about the A point. So say you are the team on the C, you're the one 5-man squad on C, right? And then there's a group of 15 people coming to contest you on C because you're doing such a good job and you're ticking it up to like 70 or 80%. It's like, do you stand here and you fight the 5 of 15? It's like generally not. If you see those people coming away, they have the ebb and flow because they have more pressure. They're scarier than you. So then you want to run away. And when you run away, then these guys will be left on C, but then you pull 15 people for 5, so then your main ball is going to have an advantage on B, right? So that's the idea. And then when these guys realize they can't catch up to you, then they're going to run away. And when they run away, then you go back to C. So that's like a easy concept of like how it applies in a war. This is why people will usually try to match numbers when they do a rotate, and they'll send 5 people to contest 5 people, so that it's more favored for their main ball. But there's times where people mess up, and that's where uh, it's really impactful in the war to pull more people because then the other team is up numbers. The other part about this is you have to communicate in this step, like right here. It's like, hey, we are fighting a 5v15. We need our main ball to push on B. And that has to be communicated to your shot caller, and your shot caller has to realize that that's happening and take advantage of it. Because if you're up 10 people on B, then you should be able to win that fight. So in New World, this ebb and flow concept mostly applies to counting numbers. There's a little bit that applies to ultimates now, but it is less than in Overwatch. Mostly it's just about counting numbers. If you have more numbers, you want to push. If you have less numbers, you want to pull off. And you want to create those situations where those like imbalanced numbers exist and exploit this concept in order to like more easily win wars. So if you're in a fort phase, then you might overload one gate. And by overload, I mean you maybe say normally you put 10 people on this gate. If you put say 20 people on this gate and they have 10 people, then you'll have an advantage, right? And it should be more easy for you to push. So then this gate can go in first, and then these other gates can just hold back a little bit. And once this gate gets in, these gates will try to support them, and that's when these other gates go in. So that's like one concept that helps with getting through into a fort in wars, is just trying to create more numbers and having an ebb and flow. In OPR, this might be a concept that more people are familiar with, is when the other team has a really, really strong Zerg and you have 20 Dex players, and you can still win when you have 20 Dex players, but it requires being uh, basically how other people would probably call it is like playing like a rat or backcapping a lot, and it's very annoying if you're the ball team to deal with this, but it works, and the same concept will apply to wars as well. So say the smiley face team is pushing up, they have capped both their home spawn, the middle point, and then they're pushing up to moon, and you just respawned. Like, so do you want to go back to moon, where the smiley face team is going to go, or do you want to go to B where the smiley face just left? Well, generally, the smiley face, if they won B, they're going to win this fight over here. So either you can kind of sneak around this and then try to backcap them as they leave, which is more risky, or you can just go to B. And if you go to B while they go to your spawn, because most people are greedy and would rather spawn camp than hold these bases, uh, then they'll be in a situation where they will lose B and they'll have this point, and then their Zerg will eventually chase you because they realize that they can't just exist up here and spawn camp and win, especially with the existence of side doors over here that no one uses for some reason. So when they chase you over to here, smiley face should be on this point, then you want to run to their home spawn because that's going to be away from them because again they have the ebb and flow, because they are scarier. And then when you, I think my slides got messed up here. But when you go over to the home spawn thing and they get here, you're generally going to want to end up running away, but not quite yet. You have to wait for them to like push onto you. So this team eventually will come back to try to get their old spawn, and when they do that, then your main team can respawn and just capture this point for free, basically. And then once they come back to here, then if you kite off into the woods and then they run back to star, then you can go back and cap this point. So then they'll end up with B usually because your ball, your ball's weaker because you lost the neutral. And then you end up with 2 points on the sides of them, and it just puts you in a spot where you're winning, but you're not actually winning the main ball fight. So that's like one concept of how ebb and flow can be applied. If they are scared than you want to run away. And that's a reason why Dex is generally better outside of fort phase than ball groups, and why in NA people are running 15 kill squad members. In EU they are running 5 because EU favors that fort phase more than NA does. In NA they have figured out, or Dropouts has figured out how to use the Dex in the fort phase, which allows Dropouts to get in the fort very, very quickly and then exploit those people because they have more movement. And with more movement, you're able to create more what Overwatch people like to call triangles. And when you have a triangle, you basically create a kill squad around people, or if you have 3 different groups around people, there's nowhere for them to hide, and people will just start dying. So anytime you create a triangle, people generally die, and that's why you see me in wars a lot. I try to sit behind people, and when you sit, let me open up Paint. Yeah, this is getting artsy. So if this black circle is the enemy, and this red thing is my ball, and then I am this orange triangle up here, uh, I am effectively gonna create a triangle with my ball, and then basically these guys in the middle won't have anywhere to run. And then if they run for me, my ball can push, and if they run to the ball, then I can push. And what this does, if I sit behind a little bit behind enemy line, it lets me basically gank the people in there, and I'm able to set them up for my ball while not having that pressure because I'm reading the ebb and flow. So if these guys are pushing, then I'm going to push. And if these guys are pushing me, then I am going to run away. And that is pretty much how this all works and how my playstyle is in wars. So going to war examples of this, I'm going to go back to what I introduced at the beginning of the video, the concepts. So there's a heal up phase to every fight, there's a dive and nuke phase, and there's a stabilize phase. And there's things that you can do during these phases to exploit there's things you can do as the other team to exploit people during these phases. So if people are being healed up, if you do damage to people, they can't ever enter this dive phase because they're not going to be full enough HP. They're not going to have the cooldowns. They're not going to feel confident going for a play. So I have a example of that here. Okay, this is a little bit further back than I wanted it to be. Uh, right here. So I see a kill squad is in my backline, right? This fight is already over. So I tell my team, yo, let's kill this kill squad while these other guys can't push. So I'm taking basically a 15v5. Normally that's a bad thing because this other team can push in and then they could wipe us because we're taking a 15v5. But in this case, if they aren't actually fully healed up, they can't actually do that play. So if I go here now, then I realize that they're not going to be able to do anything about this, and we can just take the 15v5 and just swipe them real quick, and then we can go back to the normal fight. Which is what we do, and we kill them here, and we delay them enough to where their main ball can't push. These guys are getting pressure on them, they're using their stamina, so they can actually kill our healers, and then we just take the point for free, basically. So that's an example of that, like, first one. Second phase is this dive and nuke clump phase. This is very, very common, whereas you'll hear this all the time if you have a decent shot caller that will tell people to nuke the clump. Usually this is like right after respawns happen, or this is when you're coming back from spawns and on a recontest for a point. One thing that you can do during this phase a lot is you could use showers, or you could use Path of Destinies to slow them down so they can't nuke you as effectively, because if they can't do burst damage to you, then you'll just live. So the other thing that you could do during this is you could try to live. That's very good. There are some other things that you can do during this that kind of like break this rule. If you have stone form, you could pop stone form and then go into Warhammer stuns because you'll always win that battle, and then you'll stun them during this, which will make them be the big clump that's vulnerable, and then you can basically just kill them. So that's another reason why stone form is good. But an example of this kind of kiting phase, I guess, in this like living phase would be here. So I realize that they have like 10 people. I am putting pressure on them, and then I think when I copied these clips over, it might have done. Yeah, it looks like it edited the timestamp for a couple of them at the same time. Uh, so this is going to be a little bit more scuffed than I wanted it to be. So this is actually me doing the dive. Okay, sorry, let me go back here. So I see that they are pushed up here. If the defenders push up into this middle thing and you're back here, they are in the choke and you're not in the choke. If you are in this middle thing and they are back on their point, you are in the choke and they are not in the choke. The important part is if they're in a choke, then they are more easy to be nuked. This is why people generally don't stand in doorways uh, in any FPS game or in real life, even. Like, you're not going to see someone, like, stand in an open doorway with their being exposed to do 2 different sides very often. And it's generally not good to that. You want to bait people into doorways or into chokes, which are very obvious in Fort and OPRs. This is little doors. And that's where all the conflict happens.
So I see that they're in this choke. I'm going to push them. I get some exit kills on that, and then I realize that they have less people defending this. So I'm going to try to push up through this choke, which I am not as successful with. And now I'm trying to stabilize and live and hold this space, which I am in a choke, so it's a little bit dangerous. But that is why I'm here. So that was an example of diving people, because I went for a play in, and then in the second, you'll see me follow up with another play. I have my net shot, I have my Vines ultimate, so one thing I like to do in this build a lot is I'll net shot backwards so I get the movement speed, and then I go into them, and then I'll drop the Oblivion to get away all their cleanse pots so that they can't just dodge the vines, and then I go into a vines which roots all these people, and then I'll follow that up with a scream to put them on rend and disease cap and orb. So that's an example of diving. It didn't get as many kills here, but that's like in theory how it works. So if you see a Void Gauntlet go for a play like that and your Bruiser follows up, that's when people generally die in wars. This is an example, should be an example of the opposite, where we are going to get pushed out. And then this is an example of like how to live. So I use the movement speed as a way to back up. In Overwatch, the most powerful character in the game generally is Lucio. The reason why Lucio is very powerful is when another team uses an ultimate, you can just speed away, and then the ultimate does nothing. So I am attempting to do the same thing in this game, albeit it is not as successful because slows exist. So that's why I use Blast Shot sometimes for the movement speed. So this is me backing up. I realize that they overextend. I'm going to go for a play, and then I die because I don't have melee here to follow up. So that was me trying to catch them, but because I didn't have people here to follow up, it turns into a feed. But if people are here to follow up, this is a really good play. So it's a that's the if you don't have so that's like me skipping steps, right? That was the problem here. If I go for a dive and we have not healed up or staged, then this dive will not be successful. And then after that dive, generally you want to stabilize and declump. The reason why I declump is so that they can't just dive you back super effectively. If they can only dive 1 or 2 people versus diving like 15 people, they'll generally get less kills. And then this is a final example. So this will be the third one. This is the stabilize kind of phase. So this is me like in the choke, just kind of living, not doing that much. And then after that, I realize that we are ready to dive because we've lived. And then I see that they are all clumped here, which is why I'm able to go for this play. If these guys were spread around the door and they were not clumped, this play would not be as good. I also use this clumping concept a lot when versus melees. So melees like to ball up and attack one person. So if I have blunderbuss nades, I'm not going to shoot them at the actual people here. I'm going to shoot them at my own teammate because I know they're going to be the other team is going to be a magnet to my person on my team, and they're going to group around him, which means that I know those nades will likely hit them more than if I just lobbed it at one guy. And that applies to basically every ability in New World. If you use stuff on your own teammates, you'll hit the enemy team more if the other team has the ebb and flow. So that's like a lot of words. What does that mean? If the other team is pushing onto us and you have a melee, they are likely going to hit your melee. So if you in turn shoot your abilities at your own melee, it will hit them because they are also hitting the melee, which is just like a different way to aim. It's like in a lot of games, there's like a concept of like you don't look at your crosshair when you shoot, you look at the other players and your crosshair just kind of goes over them and then you shoot. It's like two different ways to look at the same thing, but it's like you effectively get more value by looking at your own teammates versus looking at where the other team is in like these weird circumstances. So yeah, that's an example of the last concept, and I will try to keep this video shorter than normal and just cut it off here. But let me know if you guys kind of like this series and like whatnot. I'm trying to do more like overarching concept that exists. Like this ebb and flow concept does exist between multiple games. I believe it applies to any game that has some sort of like push and pull aspect. So it will apply to League, it will apply to Overwatch, it will apply to this game. It will probably apply to almost every single MMO in terms of PvP, but I have not played as many MMOs in PvP. It applies to Destiny. It applies to Halo. It will not apply to games where you just get one shot tapped across the map because there's no stabilized phase, right? It like technically it will apply in Tarkov because if you get shot and you're able to live, then you can stabilize. But most circumstances, like in Tarkov, you will get shot and you will instantly die. So it does not generally apply in Tarkov. But that's a example, I guess, of like how this concept will apply. And I think that the easiest way to Remember that it's just like this beginning circumstance. If they have more numbers, if they are scarier than you want to run. If you have more numbers, then you want to push. And that is basically it in New World. In the end, this is the last. These are the three tips I introduced at the beginning that you should probably remember. There's a healing up phase, there's a diving phase, and there's a stabilizing and decomp phase. And you need to do these phases as fast as you can so that you are less likely to get killed and can get kills. It's basically if you exist in this second phase too long, you just die in New World. So you usually want to dive and then you want to spread out again. You want to collapse on them and then spread out. Once you have your abilities, you collapse and you spread out. And then those times where you don't have your abilities, you want to heal up and you want to stage your dive. When you stage your dive, you want to think about triangles, and that's where you try to surround them, like I did at that paint drawing, like randomly. So surround them, make a triangle, and then if they're in the triangle, when you dive, they will be caught in the web and they will not be able to back up, and then they will most likely die. And that is it.